Okay, Yvonne.
Well, welcome everyone to this panel, Gender Equality in Canada. Are we there yet? We have a dynamic panel of speakers who will share their own personal experience of gender equality in our country of Canada. But before we begin the webinar, I would like to invite Kathy Murtha to lead our opening prayer and the land acknowledgement. Kathy.
A prayer for gender equality. O living God, we pray for all your people and for the church. We ask that every member be freed to serve you in truth and grace.
Wait,
We remember our foremothers,
could you hear this? Oh, you can.
women who have recognized that to be a person of faith is to respond in action. We remember those women who have faced the unknown in faith and met fear with courage. We give thanks for all those women who have dared to step forward and lead, for all those women who have challenged the stereotypes of society and risked standing alone. As your beloved children, may we be brought nearer to a new vision of your love through the grace of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
And now the land acknowledgement. Out of deep respect for the Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands since time immemorial, we acknowledge that the Mary Ward Center is situated on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that this land is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We affirm our desire for right relations with all Indigenous peoples built on respect and reciprocity. We are committed to work to redress the harms of colonization and to journey with all peoples. Conscious of the oneness of all creation, we are committed to tread lightly on the land and to honor the water that is the lifeblood of us all.
Thank you, Kathy.
It's okay, Yvonne, you can go ahead.
This year marks 20 years of IBVM presence at the United Nations. For those of you who don't know, we have an NGO representative, Sister Janet Palafox, who is here with us tonight, at the UN in New York, where she works with member states, which are governments, UN agencies, and civil society organizations to advocate for the rights of women and girls. In March of this year, the UN held the 68th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, or the CSW. This is the largest gathering on gender equality, and there were over 2,000 events held around the UN headquarters in New York over 2 weeks. During CSW, Sister Janet welcomed several delegates from the IBVM CJ network, including myself and Mary-Eileen Donovan, who is here tonight. We were celebrating our 20 years at the UN. We committed to sharing the experience of our delegates with our local networks at home to encourage them to reflect on gender issues within our own society. And we're doing that tonight. Next year will mark 30 years since about 190 governments, including ours, committed to the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. In 1995, the Women's Conference was held in Beijing, and some of our sisters attended. From it came the most progressive plan ever for advancing women and girls' rights. And it was signed by the member states, our governments. Since then, there has been significant advancement in securing women and girls' rights. However, at the current rate of progress, it will take 300 years to achieve gender equity in all parts of our life. This evening, you will hear from our panel of women as they share their life experience and reflect on their experience of progress in gender equality. We also want you to reflect on what gender issues continue to exist within your own world and what difference you can make to push gender equality forward. But before we introduce the panel, I'm going to ask Sister Sarah to share a pre-recorded video of yours truly and Mary-Eileen Donovan, who attended CSW in March. I'm Sister Yvonne Hunter. I'm presently on the leadership team of IBVM Canada, but I am here because I was a representative who opened the UN NGO office in New York 20 years ago at the session sponsored by the Mission of the Holy See. What the Archbishop said particularly impressed me. He said what it's all about is the subjugation of some for the enrichment of others. And that's why the problem of poverty, and especially the poverty of women, is such a big thing. There was a woman who spoke at the one on trafficking, and they significant resources to pro bono work, particularly on the issue of trafficking, to go after getting compensation for victims of trafficking and to take away the fruits, the economic fruits of trafficking from the people who are making money from it. Somebody from the Irish police had talked about the difficulty of prosecuting because often the victims of trafficking can't come forward or don't have the means or are afraid to do it. So they're looking at other ways to prosecute these people for things like money laundering. And one of the speakers also said, for the public at large, to be aware of it and to look out for it. So if you're in a taxi, ask questions. Look at where your food is, who's delivering your food. Are they people who are being trafficked? And if they are, talk to them and also report it. I'm Sister.
Hi, I'm Mary-Eileen Donovan, and I am the present chair of the advisory committee for the IBVM CJ NGO. One of the things that the Secretary General said yesterday, my mother and her generation didn't work this hard to move women forward in their rights, to only have our daughters and granddaughters not even having the rights that we already have. And we're moving backwards. I mean, that's what he was saying. We really need to work hard. They talked about the whole role of artificial intelligence. The woman that had done the research out of London, England, talked about the fact that she asked ChatGPT to do a story about a young boy and a young girl, and the significant difference that came up between the two stories because of the algorithms. The algorithms are determined by males. So she said, we need to not only have more women doing it, but we also need to start making sure that it responds to different information, like the United Nations information on gender equity and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Sister Yvonne and Mary-Eileen, for sharing your reflections. It is now my privilege and delight to introduce 4 extraordinary women who are with us to share their experiences of gender equality. So we have Rutha Astervas. Rutha currently lives in Ottawa, Canada, but spent her formative years in Calgary and overseas. She joined the Canadian Federal Public Service in 2003 and has extensive experience in intergovernmental negotiations and stakeholder relations. Rutha currently serves as a director in the Department of National Defense, focused on external partnerships and she has led numerous bilingual English and French workshops on equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as on respectful workplaces and ethics to civilian and mixed civilian military groups. Karen Arbour is a graduate of Loretto Abbey Secondary School and the University of Toronto. Karen has worked in healthcare in Toronto since 1998, and she has sat on various committees, including a mental health advocacy committee. She lives in Toronto with her 2 university-age daughters. Karen plans to return to the university in the fall for further studies. She enjoys learning, advocacy, arts, sports, travel, and spending time with loved ones. Sarah Tennant is an alumna of Loretto Abbey Secondary School, and she's currently a 3rd-year health sciences student at the University of Western Ontario. Sarah was a participant of the UN NGO Working Group on Girls throughout high school, and a girl representative for the UN Commission on the Status of Women Girls Caucus in 2022. Sarah plans to pursue a career in research medicine and continue her studies in the science field in graduate school. And finally, Lisa Ammon. She is the Deputy Director of Engagement for Discerning Deacons. She has learned, prayed, and worked in Catholic institutions her whole life. Inspired by the civic and ecclesial leadership of Benedictine sisters, she attended the College of St. Benedict in Minnesota. She served for 5 years as the Director of Social Justice at her parish in St. Paul, and she worked for 10 years as a community organizer with Isaiah, an alliance of more than 100 faith congregations. So join me in giving a big welcome to Rutha, Karen, Sarah, and Lisa. So Eva, if you can help to spotlight our speakers, we will start our panel conversation. Okay, and I guess, I don't know, I'm going to be your moderator, so maybe I should also spotlight myself. I'll join you on this panel. Okay, so welcome to our panel. So our conversation will take the form, we'll take the form of a conversation. So we do have 4 questions that I will offer, and each of you will have, 3 or 4 minutes to respond to the question. And we'll also leave a little bit of time after each question in case you want to respond to each other. And then after our 4 questions, we'll open it up to our audience to ask questions, and we can have a larger conversation together. Okay, so let's get started. Our first question is, what gender equality progress have you seen in your lifetime within your own environment? And maybe if we go in the order that I see you on the screen, is that okay? We'll go Rutha, and then Sarah, then Lisa, and then Karen. So Rutha, please.
Sure. Good evening. I am joining you from Ottawa and the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. So I'm in my mid-40s, and I've been working in government 20 years, so I'm halfway, if you will. And I have to say that we're not there yet. So this is a journey. Equality is always a journey, and it takes effort. So having studied in the 90s, in the late 90s, I thought, wow, this is a great time. It felt like everything was opening up. It was after the Soviet Union, great democratization, great liberalization of the economy, lots of opportunities. I went into grad school and studied European politics and was looking at how the EU was expanding. And I thought, okay, so many opportunities, so much about equality. And then as time went on, I realized, well, I feel I have opportunities, but not everyone does. And so the choices, my career choices have been to work on stakeholder relations, and it's always been like a social justice theme. And it's interesting because as I worked in various public policies, so I've worked on, I'll call it fiscal transfers in government and a federal government, where how do we get money on health and social services to different jurisdictions. I've worked in immigration, I've worked on refugee reform, I've worked on law enforcement reform, cross-border issues, including anti-trafficking, anti-smuggling, and then moved into employment insurance. And how are women represented in labor force, and what are barriers to full labor force participation and full participation in the economy, education, and life? And then moved on to defense, mostly to work on defense trade and other issues, which took me further into working on EDI. So what I can say is that the story keeps changing, and the barriers, some remain the same and some are new. And it's the confluence of different economic, social factors, policy frameworks, laws, and global pressures that can continue to affect women's rights, women's ability to fully participate in society. But some things have really remained the same even for thousands of years, and that comes down to some stereotypes and roles of women, and also how we define the workplace. There's also, so what I can say for myself is I see progress, and I've certainly worked towards achieving progress and worked towards new ways of learning about how can we use data, how can we use qualitative and lived experience and stories to craft better public policy. So I'll just say, when we get into questions and discussion, I can give more examples of what I've seen and the kinds of meetings and conferences I've been to. And when we compare Canada to other countries, there's definitely many positives, but there's also still some trends that are concerning. And I would say that while we're looking at gender equality, talking about women, I'm finding these days the discourse is about boys and where can boys find positive role models as well. So I do want to focus on women, but I'm just giving a sense of how I see things changing, and always a little surprising. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Rupa. Sarah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. As Sister Sarah said, I'm in third year in university, so some would say a short lifetime so far, but I think I've had plenty of experience and been influenced by a lot of very impactful women. I went to Loretto Abbey Secondary School, and I had experience with the Working Group on Girls with Sister Sarah and Sister Yvonne Hunter. I was able to experience and learn a lot about gender equality. I think throughout my 19 years of living, there's been many important points in my life where there's been a lot of milestones for women that I have been able to experience firsthand as I grew up, and it was a part of my childhood, not just my adult life. I think especially within my generation, the progress has been the actual conversation of gender equality becoming accepted and becoming openly spoken about throughout my peers and throughout my university experience. I was raised by two very feminist parents, I would say. And I think I became aware at a very young age that gender inequality existed. I played sports growing up, and that was like a large part of my life where gender inequality first became very prevalent to me. And then as I grew older, I wanted to go into a very rigorous academic field. And then I was also hit with that gender inequality is very prevalent in this area as well. So I think what I've seen throughout my life thus far is that the conversation and the topic of gender inequality, or gender equality on the other hand, has definitely transformed since I was a child.
Thank you, Sarah. And Lisa.
Well, I'm calling from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was born and raised in the Southern United States. And so in this conversation about women's equality in Canada, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to talk about the Catholic Church. So for me, I have my context is I have done a lot of sort of public policy work in relationship to trying to essentially get at hold offenders of domestic violence and sexual violence accountable, and to try to keep women and children safe. And that's not always gendered, but it is a gendered thing. So that's like a big 10-year chunk of my life. And I would say the thing that I learned was that that's relevant for where I'm going to go is that getting at the ideology of male superiority is really important. So it's like the thing sort of at the base of the pyramid that holds up a bunch of other things. And so for me right now, I am focused on my faith tradition, which is the Catholic Church, which I do feel like globally then is a big, this is where I connect to y'all. Globally, it's a big proponent of sort of this ideology of male superiority, not in the things that are written down, but definitely in sort of formation, as far as formation at mass, formation in terms of who gets to make decisions, who gets to speak, who gets to have voice, who gets to take up space in our main assemblies. So the progress is where you asked me to start. That's my context. The progress is there has been a lot of progress. When I was young, I couldn't be an altar girl or an altar server. My sister was able to do that. That was pretty cool. And it just really, like, I still grant my daughter, she's 12 years old. She was an altar server on Sunday. She has long hair. It just makes me super happy. Women have been able, my mom, when I grew up, was able to be a lector. So she was able to read some of the scriptures at our mass. She was able to have voice in our public assembly in that way. And she was a really, really good lector. And so that was just part of that wasn't true for her. When she grew up, her mom and no other women around her, not the Sisters of Loretta, nobody actually could do that. So I feel like we've seen some progress there. Recently, there's just been all kinds of cool progress. 2016. Well, I'll just say this. 19 years ago, when I was at the College of St. Benedict, I found out that Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute, and I was in college, and that was shocking to me. And now, it feels like the conversation has come really pretty far from just 19 years ago. In 2016, Mary Magdalene's feast day her day on the general Roman calendar was bumped up and restored to a feast day. And there's just people all around. I saw, I do kind of like Sarah. I think these are just sort of like signs. I'm just giving glimmers because this is what we can do in 3 minutes. But like Sarah said, there's more conversation about it. I started earlier with, well, this might be my context, but when I started with the working against sexual violence, it's really, really hard to talk about it. And people wanted to say, well, that's a private thing. That's a private matter. I feel like not too long ago, there was this whole Me Too movement where it felt like this huge, it was just like this wild, solidarity push. And that was just sort of amazing. And it's very, very different than my early adult life than now. So I like Ruth. I'm in my mid 40s. I would say we have Sister Natalie Becquart was named to some women are being named finally just in the last 5 years to some very high positions in the Vatican. And this is a super cool one, and I'll land with this one. Sister Laura Vicuña, she is the first vice president of an ecclesial conference for the Catholic Church. So the ecclesial conference in the United States is made up of all male bishops. The ecclesial conference of the Amazon is newly representative, and she is in the slot for there's a woman religious slot now for a vice president of the ecclesial conference of the Amazon, and indigenous woman for slot for the ecclesial conference of the Amazon, formally representing that region of the Catholic Church to Rome. So these are the things that I've little pieces of hope for you there.
Thank you, Lisa. Fantastic. And Karen, love to hear from your experience.
Hi, I'm Karen Arbour. Thanks for inviting me. I work at Sunnybrook Hospital, and I guess first off, well, I struggled with this question a bit. This is the one that was the hardest for me. I want to acknowledge my privilege, first of all. I think, my story isn't the same as many less privileged women. And I was raised by a very strong single mother who told me I could do anything I wanted, and I totally believed it. I was not handed over, but I was raised in the Catholic Church, where I had an amazing experience with youth groups, core weekends, sports, everything. Then on to Loretto Abbey, where I had no idea women's sports weren't supported, go all girls education. It was a fantastic, very sheltered, like when I left Loretto and went to university, I was like, oh, this is how it is. So I really didn't know. So that was really, really good for me. So I decided for this question to look at it from a healthcare perspective, just because that's kind of what I know. So for me, for many, many years, I was in an administrative role at Sunnybrook. And one of my points that I'm going to make is that I had a very hard time breaking out of that. A lot of women are kind of, kept in maybe not kept in an administrative role, but there's very little room for advancement. I had to, I'm going to say fight, and that's not a strong word. I had to fight for probably about a year for a promotion, like tooth and nail. I had to redo my own, what's that thing called? Role profile, argue about money. And this is not who I am. Like, I am not that kind of person at all. But I did it because recently my friends, my peers, my coworkers, we've all been talking about this. So I did it and I was successful. Just recently, I got this promotion, finally, moving on up a little bit. So from a healthcare perspective, like, thank you. One, I had to really dig deep for these. So one that I really noticed that's different is granting agencies that give scientists and physicians grants have started to sort of put calls out for certain chairs, like research chairs. So in other words, they'll give money to people either with a disability or a woman. So it's not an open call. Everyone can't apply. It's basically affirmative action, but I guess that's not really the term that we use these days. So it obviously helps level the playing field due to work interruptions and other factors that have held women back in their work. And I see a lot of, I do a lot of CV work and grant work, and I see a lot of women who are held back because they've taken maternity leaves, and these are called work interruptions. That sounds like a terrible way to describe having a child, but that's what they call them. And so they're definitely at a disadvantage in that way. I would say, going back to the administrative positions, they've been, typically filled by women, typical gendered roles, subordinate to men, lower pay, no room for advancement. Now, some leadership positions are being filled by women now, still not enough, still not CEOs, still not high level. But, and having said that, healthcare is more advanced, I would say, than probably other sectors, like in terms of female leadership. And then I just thought of one other thing that kind of affected me earlier in my life, not now, but childcare costs have lowered. So the government has done a nice job in making childcare accessible for everybody. When I had Sarah and Caitlin, I really struggled to pay for childcare because I had to work, and a lot of women quit work because they can't afford childcare. And if you're a single parent, that really is kind of, it's a major issue. So that leads into a whole bunch of other problems, poverty, lowered health, and other issues. So, and I think that's it. Yeah. So, I guess I did find I've actually looked up some things and some government things that, but I think we all know about those. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Karen. There's lots of interconnections with what you're all saying, so I want to open it up and just see if any of you want to respond to each other, or you can ask a little question of each other at this point. And just feel free to jump in if anybody wants to. Yeah, Rita.
So just picking up on the last points here about the life cycle, and that poverty, like one event can cause precarity over the full someone's full life, right? If you're a woman, you're a single mother, or you're in a low income or kind of complex situation, if you're not making good money, your family has precarious housing, it's very hard to catch up, right? It feeds into nutrition, educational opportunities, and later your pension. And one thing that we've noticed in research and government, I'm speaking broadly because I've had many different jobs, but divorce is one of the single most like tragic events in someone's life, because especially for women, because of the long-term financial implications, particularly if a woman did have these job interruptions or took time out, which very importantly to care for a family. And when it comes to how divorce is treated currently, you're penalized for that, and you're penalized over the long term. So just to say, these are kind of structural factors. I actually personally had worked on employment insurance reform on maternity, parental, and caregiving benefits. And the large reason for doing so was to help women. But one of the ways to help women and families is to actually convince men to take leave and make it normal. And so that way, any parent takes time, which is positive for the child and the family, and learns those skills. It's not like you're just the add-on parent, the spare human. You're actually an active father, or you're an active second parent, whichever work situation you have. And also it means that everyone feels that pain, and therefore everyone in theory could advocate for better gender equality, better benefits, and better workplaces that normalize family leave and caregiving, not just for children, but for seniors, for spouses. We all live, well, many people live longer, especially in Canada, North America, and the OECD. And almost all of us at some point will face a disability due to old age or an accident. So these are the kinds of things that when we talk about gender equality, it's not just supporting women, but actually support society.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Rutha.
One of the things I noticed is that this question is really hard. Like we're already getting into fixing things and wanting to talk about a little bit of the issues, but like we were supposed to talk with, like what's going well, what progress have we seen? And it's kind of tough because this like sun doesn't feel like we're getting there fast enough. So that's one just noticing.
Mm-hmm. Just to say, Rutha, when I was at the UN 20 years ago, the two big topics were the feminization of poverty, and the other one was the need to involve boys, especially young boys and young men, in pursuing equality for women and to get them on board, so to include it in education. And when we were there this year, guess what? Same two themes came up. Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I've seen it at both times. But one thing about privilege I'd like to also point out is that many of us live really good, comfortable lives in North America. And I know that's not who all the Loretto Sisters IBVM CG serve. And certainly the work at the UN has been remarkable to give that global face. One thing I would just say as well is what's really interesting is in a lot of, like in North America, you can speak about that dream where immigrant parents, their kids, the next generation can already go ahead and achieve, right? Like my parents were immigrants, they met in Canada, and it's like they've educated 2 daughters. So, and I think for a lot of us, we may have part of that story, or just to think back 1 or 2 generations, how different our lives are, right? Particularly if you come from a traditional, let's say, farming or laboring class or resource focused, it doesn't matter, sort of natural resource focus. Like so many of us have had opportunities to go to university and achieve very like managerial or plus jobs, or very intellectual jobs, or just choose the jobs that we want and not what we inherited as a small, as a family business, for example. So these are all very important things to take into account as well of what has changed even quite quickly.
And Sarah and Karen, you both chose to go to an all-girls secondary school. And one of the arguments for all-girls schools is that girls have a better opportunity to develop their skills without having the boys there who try to dominate everything. Do you think that's true?
Turn down my volume. Can you turn down your volume, Sarah? Okay, yeah, I think that is true. I mean, that was my experience, and I think it might not be like, it's not like a microcosm of our actual world, but it starts out, it gives you a good start. So I think yes, from my experience at Loretto Abbey, there was no, because sports was my focus. That was really it wouldn't have been the same had I gone to like York Mills Collegiate or a co-educational school. So yes, I do believe, and even in academics, there's well, actually Sarah can speak to this a bit, because she went to a co-ed school for like grades 7, 8, and 9, and then decided on her own to switch to Loretto. which I was really happy about. So she can actually speak to that, what you're asking, Sister Evan, because she had both experiences. So I'll stop talking and let my daughter speak.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I would definitely say that it was, I don't remember the term you used, but it was very beneficial, definitely, for me to go to Loretto and go to a all-girls school. I found the co-ed was, I guess the word you could use is distracting. I don't know if it was distracting because of the co-ed, but I think when I went to Loretto, it was a very different experience than any other school I had been to. And I think, although some could say it's like sheltered because that's not how society is, obviously society is co-ed. It's like during those formative years, you learn how to be educated and you learn how to socialize with other women, and your high school experience is very different. And I was not unaware of what was going on in society. I know my mom was talking about how she felt sheltered and how she didn't know what was going on outside. But I think today, when I went to high school just 2 years ago, I was very aware of what was going on in society. And it actually made me 100 times more grateful to be going to Loretto and not necessarily having to experience that every single day. I was still being able to learn in my own little nutshell, and then experiencing society afterwards and experiencing that kind of co-ed existing with other people was not very shocking to me, but definitely beneficial to my education for sure. That kind of educational experience with like strictly academics and lots of socialization, but very positive socialization, was really amazing.
Thanks, Sarah. So maybe we'll move on to our second question. I know we've already probably raised a lot of issues already, but the second question is, what are prevalent gender equality issues within our society? Well, if you want to maybe go in depth on an issue you've already raised, or raise other issues that you think are important, we'll follow the same speaking order. So we'll start with Rutha, if you're ready.
Sure. I don't like to go first because I feel like I'm also in some of these questions about advocacy, I can't really advocate. I'm not really speaking on behalf of anyone. I'm really speaking on behalf of myself, but I'll try. In terms of society, like, I think we can talk about, trends that extremism, greater violence, greater debate, but not always constructive. To me, what's disturbing is the continued and perhaps worsening access to justice, to the legal system. Also the continuing lack of representation of women, or in general, like of society's face, especially in Canada. We're not fully representative yet in the public service. We're making strides, not in law enforcement, not yet in the military, not in the medical profession, not in CEO and C-suite boards and leadership. So there's still a lot of groundwork there. In terms of trends, what I find interesting is one public policy that a lot of governments with aging populations, in other words, the West, are looking for, are to provide greater flexibility to enable women to stay in the workforce. But unfortunately, one thing I'm finding is with greater flexibility, especially in the current economy, someone mentioned Uber, right? It's this shift work, and there are fewer and fewer jobs with benefits. There are fewer jobs with job protections. So increasingly women especially have to choose if you want the flexibility either for caregiving or just because of your schedule, then you also have more precarity. So you're either super rich and you can call the shots, or to get that flexibility, you're very low pay and very vulnerable. And it's still very hard, despite having learned through COVID how you can work remotely, how we can be a bit more flexible, how you can allow schedules to work as long as people get their work done. Instead, we're talking more about in this labor force, more about the surveillance society, really quick kind of brutal decisions, not giving people second chances, treating people, the labor force, as very like a commodity. And yet at the same time, when we're looking now for specialized people, and I can speak personally, it's very hard to find staff, and I don't really know how it flips so quickly. And how do you promote like good workplaces and good jobs and good leadership? I'd also mention that despite, I think, general societal acceptance of gender equality and diversity, especially in Canada, there's still a lack of the visibility there. Like when the news or like newspaper media, traditional print media are trying to better balance images, but like until recently, the sports pages never had women. When they show senior leadership, like most photos are male. I think they're saying 80% of the photos in a newspaper or websites are male, and they're trying to balance it out. And to me, this is about the need for more deliberate thoughts of how to get women into leadership and into boards, right? So people talk about quotas, they talk about targeted searches, talent searches. But for me, one thing I want to talk about is the talent pipeline, and it's mentorship, coaching, sponsorship, and role modeling. The more women you see, the more women are likely to come forward and not self-select out. So these are the trends that I want to talk about just visibility of women in society, and especially in role model and important roles. In government, you'll often see a lot of women at the number 2 or number 3 role, but not necessarily in the top roles. And particularly not in finance or not in AI, not in computing. A lot of the .coms, the unicorns, like everyone's glorifying the big businesses. There's more people named Steve or Mike or many other male names than there are women in the top 100, top 50, top whatever you want to say, NASDAQ, Toronto Stock Exchange as CEOs or CFOs. The last thing I'd mention as well is just like when we look at education in a lot of fields, so I work currently with a lot of STEM, so science, tech, engineering, maths. While there's more women than men, let's say in engineering right now, currently, and completing, there's still so few women in the field, or that stay in the field 2 or 5 or 10 years out and don't actually get to leadership roles in STEM fields. So that's another area that I think a lot of work needs to be done, and to figure out why. We have ideas why, but it just means that our voices are not there. Thanks.
Thank you, Rutha. We'll move over to Sarah.
I think that there's a long list that this question could be answered by, but I decided to go with representation by women in fields that women are present, because I think that I have like an interesting way of looking at it through university and like my academic career. There's a very large minority of female leadership, especially in university, the president and the student council president being male, the large majority of my professors and my teaching assistants being male, and the clubs and large associations at school being led by men, mostly involved with men. I think that, so during my first semester of school this year, I took one class that had a female professor. And coincidentally, it was my favorite class. It was called Emerging Trends in Healthcare. And it was a very interesting class, and I loved the content, but I found that the way that it was taught from a female lens, it was subtle, but it made a really big difference. Talking about emerging trends in healthcare. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of trends in healthcare that have a lot to do with women, and that it's very important that women are brought up in this way. And I think in a lot of my other classes that was missing. I'm not saying all classes should be taught by women, and that it's always important to have a female perspective through every single academic class. But I acknowledge that this was a really big aspect of this course, and it was something that a lot of my other classes were missing. So the representation of having the professor be a woman and having the teaching assistant be a woman made the class very like the holistic way that the class was taught. I was like, it was completely understood, and the class was really, really well understood. I think related to that, I would say like the access to education or representation of a successful education or career. There are whole programs at school that are dominated by men, and then the other programs, there are majority men. Again, the presidents and the executives of large clubs also being men. So I think women not being represented in that way, therefore not as many women involved in those clubs, therefore less education or lack of education in that way. I think it's important to acknowledge that it has improved greatly, and that the split of men and women in, let's say, the medical field, or the men and women that are applying to medical school, is half, and that's amazing. But does that mean that they are working just as hard to get there? Probably not. Or does that mean that they have the same opportunities after they complete medical school? Probably not. Although the numbers are there, it doesn't really mean anything if it's just numbers and not actual life experience.
Thank you, Sarah. Those are great points. Lisa.
I just think there's a lot of problems, but violence, really explicit violence against women globally, is really upsetting. The numbers are gross, they're horrible. I would say it's generational for me, like the violence against women, like the violence against my grandmother, the violence against my aunts, the violence against myself and my sister. And then I have these 2 daughters, and I think, I want to send them into the world. So like, I don't know that I just feel like it's just really like, that's the tip of the iceberg. And anyway, I care about all of it, but I feel like sometimes I just want to talk about that because I don't know that we do always. And then I would say similarly, I would get back into my lane and here in the Catholic Church, since I don't live in Canada. And I think having visibility, decision making, the ability to be official, all of these things matter. They matter in and of themselves, but they also signal things to everybody else about our worthiness, our dignity, our basically our equality, So like I started to talk a little bit about this, but I feel stronger and stronger the more I try to make a case inside of the synod for ways in which women can have more voice, more visibility, more decision making, be more official, be representative, take up space, preach. These are all things that we can do and are sometimes done. But the thing is that it feels like in the Catholic Church, a lot of times it's contingent. It's like, well, if you get special permission from the bishop, or if you go and you build another organization, or if you join another kind of group, or you could do a workaround. It's not the official sort of path. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I would say, as working in a Catholic church for 10 years, you can write in the writings or in the catechism, it'll say, this is, constitutive to who we are. But if I'm in charge of it, I have to build sort of an extracurricular space for whatever I'm in charge of. So like it takes a couple months to turn 100 people out to something where people are coming to mass. And then they have to come to something on a Wednesday night. And this is not to say, oh, poor me. This is like, well, if this is the space for social justice, why is that an extracurricular space? Well, it's an extracurricular space because the priest isn't running it, because the father isn't running it. And so it's like, if the priest is running it, then the announcements are controlled by our priest. The links to the homily in the joint assembly, where you get 500 to 1,000 people each week coming and hearing and participating as a people. There's just more capacity for agency for the men. Why is this a problem? Well, because it teaches that male superiority. It teaches not in our writings, because we say that we don't believe this as Catholics, and it's written down that we don't believe this, but in our experiences, it says that it shows that it's almost like male superiority is backed by God. And it's just really hard to undermine that. So that's what I'd add to this.
Thank you, Lisa. And Karen, we'll pass it to you.
Oh, hi. Okay. I feel like the biggest problem we face in Canada, and of course worldwide, is gender-based violence, which is rooted in gender inequality. That's not what I'm going to talk about, but I just wanted to say that off the top. You know, most women have a story. Most women have experienced fear. It's unacceptable, and it's promoting, hopelessness and anxiety and helplessness in women. And I don't know the answer, but I think things like this are certainly one of them. But anyway, I'm going to talk about healthcare, but I couldn't not say that. Okay, so I think gender-based discrimination in healthcare leaders is my first thing that I wanted to say. Women are less visible, as Ruth already said, in leadership positions in healthcare. They lead fewer than, like, I think it's 30% of hospitals and other healthcare organizations. My institution has never had a female CEO, nor has the affiliated university, Toronto, ever had a female president. Women need a leadership voice to advance women and girls' rights. So that's in healthcare leaders. I think the gender-based discrimination in healthcare for women as patients. A great example of this, it's very nuanced. I hope I can explain it correctly, but I saw research rounds where this emerged doctor was talking about, when we talk about women's health, cardiovascular health, and they say women have atypical chest pain, right? Atypical chest pain. The person, so brilliant, said, why is the women's pain atypical? Why is the men's pain the typical pain? And then everything is missed for women. Like, oh, well, you might have a sore back, that's atypical. So there's much more to that story. I'm not going to remember it, but or be able to express it correctly, but just that little tiny language or way people think about it is that we are the atypical ones. And that's just simply not true. We're 50% of the population. We have as many heart attacks as men. So there you go. There is equality. I'm just kidding. So also gender-based discrimination as patients. Obviously this has changed a little bit, but most research was done on men for men. I think there's been, some advancements, so that could go to answer number one. There's been a little bit more research on women's health. Although, having said that, I would say even though we have universal healthcare, women aren't always able to access healthcare in the same way men are. Women are often more likely to be treated differently or maybe less aggressively as men. Their pain is often dismissed as psychological. Women's reproductive health issues are understudied and underfunded, all the way from reproduction to menopause. I was told to have a glass of ice water. Okay. Ageism, after a certain age, women are invisible and ignored, less useful to society, where in reality, older women have so much to offer, so much to teach. The world should be listening instead of ignoring. And then just a bit more about the healthcare, I guess. When I talked initially, when we were just chatting in the beginning about women saying no to things that I asked them for, I put together a lot of workshops. Women are often not able to say yes, and they always say to me, Karen, I'm so sorry. I am so busy. I can't take on one more thing. Women are carrying the mental load often in their own families. Women at work are busier than ever. It's much, much easier to find a man to sit on a committee or to do a research round. They're like, yeah, sure, no problem, I can do that, which is great. But then we have a lot of, like, for example, I'm doing a workshop this weekend on Friday, and we have so many men speaking and very, very few women. So I've actually had to remove some men and like search for women, because it's really, we want that female perspective as well. It's not just about how it looks, but we need to have that female perspective as well. And then just like a more personal thing, this is not really related to healthcare, but most single parent homes are led by women who are more likely to experience poverty. Poverty is a major factor in poor health, as Rutha said earlier. Sorry, I don't mean to keep quoting you, Rutha. But this is a cyclical relationship for many women. Lack of education, lower socioeconomic status, ill health, all come into play. So yeah, lots and lots of problems, and that's only like 1/100.
Thanks, Karen. There's so much here, and I'm thinking we only have 30 minutes left actually for our time together tonight. So if it's okay, we're going to combine question 3 and 4 so that we have time for questions, because I think there's so much that this audience would like to ask and engage in conversation with you. So if we look at our last 2 questions combined. So what solutions or advocacy actions can we implement at an individual, a community, or policy level? So including what we want to ask from our leaders to help achieve gender equality in our lifetime. And would you like me to go in reverse order, Karen? Are you willing to go first this time? Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so what I thought for that question, for in the individual, community, and policy, for the individual level, like I think we do feel a little hopeless and helpless sometimes, but vote for women. Look out for violence. Speak up when you see inequality. Gender inequality at home, or gender equality at home, will enhance gender equality in society and work. So teach our children, teach in schools, teach often and early about gender equality. In the community, I would say like zero tolerance of violence against women and any gender equality. Provide resources and learning opportunities for women and others, not just women, but like everybody, boys, men. Webinars like these, right? Spread the word through education, even like public health initiatives can be so helpful. And then for policy, like we all do this at work, but I think we kind of do it as a rote thing, but it is so meaningful. Integrate anti-bias training and diversity training in schools and workplaces. Start earlier, start way earlier. Don't start like in university or after university. Everything needs to start in grade school or even lower. And maybe it is, and I'm just kind of out of touch with elementary schools right now. But encourage a safe environment and better mechanisms to report discrimination and sexual violence or any kind of violence. That's a major problem. Enact tougher laws to stop gender-based violence and pay the same salary for equal work, for heaven's sake. And I guess for merging the 2 questions together, what else did I have to say? I just had a few notes here, but I think I'm just kind of repeating myself. 1 second. I think I can wrap that up, Sister Sarah. Yeah, so I guess just about the law, the last thing I was going to say is about the laws. Like some current laws and policies kind of feed into the gender stereotypes and reinforce them. So these laws kind of have to change at the federal level. For example, education, employment discrimination, caregiving needs, and women do disproportionately care for both the young and the elderly in Canada. So caregiving does require better policies for better equality. And so much of this care is unpaid, and that's why women aren't, rising to where they need to be, because they are so burdened. And by burdened, I don't mean like these are very important things as well. Looking after your family and doing all of those things are so important, but you can't do everything. Although I seem to know so many women who seem to be doing everything, and they're just amazing. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Karen. Lisa, what would you like to add?
I would say to take up the spaces that we can. So Catholic Women Preach. There's an organization where Catholic women are preaching all online, and then they're sharing it with each other, and it's a global thing. And it's actually just a powerful, interrupting thing to imagine Catholic women preaching, because most Catholic people don't think that Catholic women are allowed to preach. So if you're a preacher, get on that space, please. Also, we can preach in liturgies of word and communion. So I find that a lot of times we're like, here's the they call it in the church, the glass ceiling, or whatever, the stained glass ceiling, here it is. And because there's a stained glass ceiling here, a lot of the women we're down here complaining about it instead of taking up all the space we can till we're right up against it. And so I just would advocate for us to encourage other women to do that. I guess in the same way, representation, how many lectors are women, how many ushers are women, how many people in the sort of the how many people with the roles, how many acolytes are women, traditional things that are just like, I think like for our church, it's whoever signs up, and it's just kind of like trying to fill all the roles. But women need to be actively recruited, like you were talking about on your committees, Karen. Like we actually have to have we have to begin to behave differently, and we have to like figure out how to hold some spaces open and act, you know, sort of proactively recruit people. I would say I have a lot of inspiration for whoever y'all were who restored the feast of Saint or of Mary Magdalene, apostle to the apostles. Like, so there was a deacon, Saint Phoebe. Most people, her scripture isn't read during any lectionary time. We could ask for that to happen. We could ask for her feast to be restored. We can just tell people about Phoebe the deacon. It does a lot of work to just be like, hey, Phoebe the deacon, she existed, she's in scripture. And why is that important? Because right now the Pope is kind of considering and kind of saying no and kind of saying yes. And he's got he's got commissions. The religious women of the world actually had got him to open up his imagination in 2016 about whether or not women could be restored to the order of deacons. Right now, the place where he is that he's thinking, maybe, women already act as deacons. They already do all the work. We don't, so yeah, sure, they can keep doing that, but maybe we won't ordain them. So I think if that's kind of where that's a poll though, it's not the vote. Like, so like, that's a glimmer. He's open and initiated a process that hasn't come to an end, but there is a timeline on it. So participate in that process. If you think that that's, baloney, then you got to tell somebody about it before the process comes to an end. So like, just participate. And I think the other thing I would say is, I think part of it is about helping one another, either through mentorship, through just asking people, but helping people to risk the advocacy and the sort of determination and the hope that it takes to actually try to think that your action is going to make a difference towards change. So there's some sort of like, I don't know if it's like, it's almost like midwife type work where we have to help each other sustain how long it takes to make these changes. Like, so campaigns can take 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And one analogy I like to use is like, what if the 3 wise men like set off on a journey to go see Jesus, and they like sat down and they're like, you know what? They sat down before they got to Jesus and they're like, this is a fool's errand. Like, you know what? This is crazy. We're not doing this anymore. But you have to kind of like encourage each other and spur each other on. And I think part of that is psychological, emotional, spiritual, and just communal to sort of sustain some of these things. And those were my answers for the last 2 questions.
Thank you, Lisa. I can feel the passion. I think everybody else on this call can feel the passion too. Thank you. Okay, we'll move over to Sarah.
I would say starting at the individual level, the education and conversation around gender equality should not fade once it's spoken about, at least in my circles, within my peers. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I have a lot of friends who are passionate about it as well. But sometimes when things go our way, or when there aren't very prevalent issues in the world happening, those conversations kind of go on the back burner and they're not really spoken about anymore, when realistically there are always gender equality issues. I also think, I know this webinar is about Canada, but just because I am allowed to enroll in school and I'm allowed to drive and I voted in the last election does not mean that everybody in the world did. And I think that's really important as well. Just because I'm able to do so, and in Canada I have the privilege to do some things, does not mean that every woman is as well. I think it's crucial that these conversations are kept alive even as the milestones are happening, because unfortunately it's possible that we are not always allowed to do these things. So it's important to always talk about how amazing it is that we are allowed to do what our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, sometimes even mothers, weren't allowed to do. I think that's something that I really acknowledge because of my generation, that maybe not generations before me have to think about all the time, because it's like, for my mother or for my grandmother, they remember times when they were not did not have the right to do a lot of things, but I don't remember those times. I was a child, or I've always had the same rights as long as I can live. So I think it's really important for that to be a reminder. I would also say action against gender inequality should be started as a young age, like preventatively, rather than just fixing what has happened to everybody throughout their lives. Continuous education, implementation of EDI for women and women's opportunities, female representation and female voices, as everyone has said, where females are always present, engaging also non-women, men and boys, to be able to be in these conversations, but also a part of our plans to fix what is going on. Just because women are on board and women are really passionate about it doesn't mean that something is going to, like a solution is going to be formed, because we live in a society with more than just women. And I would also say, on a bigger level, like community or policy, that intersectional approaches are really important. Not just women, but talking about other forms of discrimination that women can face, like racial and women with disabilities. I think that it's all very related, and we need to be talking about it from a much bigger lens than just women, but we know that. I would say otherwise, the last question, what we're asking from leaders, like I said in the beginning, I think that women in Canada have a different kind of fortune than maybe women in the other parts of the world do. So our Canadian government to be supporting and influencing other governments without the same opportunities as us. Having these conversations, me and my mother and my sister have these conversations very frequently, and I think that's why I feel fortunate to know about these issues. Me and my mom frequently speak about paid parental leave for mothers and fathers. We frequently talk about gender-based violence. We frequently talk about equal access to education, and it's something that I will take with me throughout my life and talk about with everybody else, just that word of mouth with my peers. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we're going to move on to Rutha, and then we're going to take questions from our audience. So audience, get ready and start. We probably already have a question, so just hold on to it. We'll get to you soon. Rutha.
Great. Well, a lot of my points were picked up, and actually I want to pick up exactly on gender-based and diversity analysis is key. So knowing who you serve, knowing who your programs serve and don't serve, and trying to figure out the why. So it's not just about quantitative data, because we're finding more and more it's not disaggregated. We're not actually always asking the questions to figure out who those populations are. And one thing I did in the last 3 jobs is to make sure that we redo our surveys. I've worked with StatsCan, I worked with other departments to even just to start to get there, so we can benchmark and then do better gender budgeting, gender analysis to figure out who's where and why not. Employment equity is still so important, and we may, like, I know there is a push to rethink the categories, which are currently women, persons with disability, Indigenous, and visible minorities, and looking at intersectionality. But there's also people are looking at other aspects of diversity, and how we look at socioeconomic. Like, is it quadrants? Is it 5? Is 10? Like, there's just different ways to think about it. I think it's really important to talk to our leaders about how do we measure progress at work, and how do we do performance reviews, and what we value. Because if you're going to start talking about how he or she could put more hours in, well, maybe they don't have children or caregiving. That's an ageist thing. Oh, well, hey, come out for drinks with us. Well, not everyone drinks. Not everyone, that doesn't always mean it's a safe environment. Do you play golf? Do you have money? Do you have spare time? These are not equal factors, right? So how do you get noticed at work? Also, in this hybrid environment, it's easy to bias the people you see right in front of you and to keep giving them the better assignments. I'm not saying I do this. I'm saying these are concerns that we hear, and we need to talk to leadership about what's fair, who is seen, and how do we how do we give people access to opportunities so that they can perform, they can shine. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is also when we look at teams, what do we value? Do we value competition, or do we value collaboration? How do we make sure we're on the same mission together? How do we incentivize collaboration, incentivize people to take time to mentor, coach, and to sponsor people? Because if you're just trampling on others to get ahead, you're not going to be the leader that people want to see. Talent management, talent promotion. Again, sometimes you have to really reach out and pick out that one person who will be that diverse voice and help them stay there. And it might not be easy. Maybe they don't want to be there. Maybe it's been a very difficult journey. But until we start to change the face of our boards and our management tables, we're not going to get that full story. We have to make it safe and inclusive. Another piece I talk about is pay transparency. So one thing we hear about, especially now that AI and just online applications, you don't really know what job you're applying for or what kind of salary band you'll get. And that's getting more opaque and not more transparent. Talking about salary bands versus like a maximum or minimum, it really affects how people interview. And that's the other thing I just want to quickly touch on. How do we reduce barriers to even job applications, right? The more you get AI looking for keywords, if you're not already in the know, you don't have a mentor, you don't come from a family who works in that field, maybe you didn't go to that school or that city, people don't know you. That affinity bias is very strong. So how do we coach? How do we give feedback on CVs? Do any of you stop and think, hey, I'm going to give feedback to this person who failed because they're probably great, but they just didn't write the right CV or the right application. Like that's one thing I've been focusing on is mentoring persons from disadvantaged backgrounds or first-time applicants who really, you can tell they just had no clue. The other thing I've pushed for is to have guides of how to apply and give the example of a decent answer and a strong answer, just to encourage people to follow the model and to demystify. Other things with interviews to consider, like in person can be hard to travel, it's expensive. Hybrid can be hard if you have children running on the background or you're, caregiving. Not also from a diversity perspective, not everyone wants to go on screen. I have women who are Muslim on my team and who choose to be covered or do not wish to be on video, which is a whole other discussion as well about who is seen and not seen. So just a lot of things to think about. When we are inclusive, what does it look like? And how can we do it during the daytime in front of others and with everyone invited and welcome? The very final thing I'd say is also to be like the bystander effect. If you see something, say something. And it takes practice and courage, right? To step in and say something, call people in, call people out. People freeze when bad stuff happens. And I'm realizing that, like, especially the new generation of co-op students this time of year, I'm shocked by some of the things they've been saying I haven't heard in 20 or 30 years that are really like, it's like as if some sexist terms or slurs or concepts like have been forgotten. How do these people even know this? They must have heard it somewhere. So I feel like I have to kind of step up and say something because I am in a leadership position. We have to train everyone to speak up, particularly if they're offended. So, and these are things that I expect of myself and of my staff. So being part of leadership, I feel I have to walk the talk. That's it for me.
Thank you, Rufa. It's tremendous. So we'll open it up for questions now. We have probably only about 10 minutes for questions. Sorry, folks, we had lots of good conversation already from our panel, but we'd love to hear from the rest of the group. So if you can just raise your hand. If you see on the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a react button and it has a little raise hand function. And then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Phyllis, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, my battery is going to die, but I wanted to get my question in quickly. To the other Sarah, when she was talking about her emerging health trends, and her professor was a woman with the assistant a woman, I would be very interested in what how many women and how many men were in that class. Mm-hmm. I'm going to guess there was a lot of women.
Yes, I would say it was definitely majority women. Yes.
And how did the men react?
I think it's interesting in that kind of class who raises their hand to participate in conversation. I would say it was majority women as well. So I don't have many reactions from the men in the class, but I think that's enough of a reaction who wants to speak up in that kind of conversational class like it was. It was very much like participation. I think that kind of says enough about who had things to say and who did not.
Thank you.
Did they choose the class because of their professor or because of the course? There was no option.
There actually was an option that I don't believe that was a mandatory course for the year. I chose it because I thought that it would be a very interesting course without knowing that it was a course taught by a woman. And actually, not knowing that would even be that important in my education. I was only in first year when I chose the class, and I didn't realize the impact that would have on the way that the course material was taught or the way that I thought about that class. But with that experience now, I completely understand that it had such an impact on everything related to the course.
Mm.
Do we have other questions? Yeah, Linda.
Thank you. I couldn't find the little hand thing, so I was struggling there. But I worked in violence against women for over 35 years. I worked at a women's shelter here in Barrie. So I really appreciate that, recognizing the effects of violence on women. And even the knowing that violence happens to women has sometimes affects how afraid women are to be visible. And one of the challenges around my work in violence was that we had to be confidential for the women's sake, because if the partner knew she was at the shelter, she could be in danger. So confidentiality became very important, but it also made it invisible. Like you couldn't say how many women, well, they did say how many women we had there, but confidentiality didn't help us very much in some ways because, yeah, it was hidden. It's not seen. So it's nice to hear that even talked about here, because I think that does need to be noted for women, because it does happen. And even if it isn't physically happening to you, the idea that it could happen if I speak up and I am more visible, I'm going to be in danger. But I will just share from one, because we had a woman that was killed by her partner, and I struggled with speaking about her. And I remember one of the other directors of another shelter said, Linda, her confidentiality doesn't matter anymore. You're helping his confidentiality by not speaking about the loss of her and the loss of that mother and who she was. And that really helps. So that helps me too in this sharing that people had about, we need to be more visible though, but we've got to be, we got to support one another, because it is scary. It is scary for me anyway, sometimes to be seen and to help those women be seen. I do appreciate that it's a frightening place for some women to step into. I don't know if I have a question in all of it, I have to admit. I have more of a feeling of that camaraderie, a connectedness that really does help when you do work in isolation alone with traumatic women who have experienced trauma. It does help when you hear women speak and know what you're going through and what they're going through. Yeah, we need to be more visible.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
I see Joanne, you've raised your hand.
Yes, I have. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing conversation. I was really, I guess, what Lisa was talking about really resonated about the church. I'm currently working with 7 girls from Loreto Kirribilli here in Australia, in Sydney, who travelled to Old Youth Day last year. And their experience of church was quite disappointing, actually, because they got a lot of feedback about what they were wearing, because it was too tempting for the seminarians. So we're doing a lot of faith formation with them at the moment. I meet with them every week to unpack all of that, but also to unlearn a lot of that. So it's almost like they've gone on this pilgrimage to be transformed, and they've come back and it's their views of the church is, you know, that kind of masculine church, and it's all about what's tempting for the seminarians and what's not, and you should wear something appropriate. And this, the sad reality about that is that the women who were on that journey with them were the ones that are really not, you know, not calling out that behavior, but instead saying to the girls, yeah, you need to dress appropriately. So that I was, you know, what Lisa was talking about in terms of the church, and it's all, you know, women's role in the church is contingent. And I totally agree, especially the church in Australia. We've got a lot of, at the moment, I'm working with the Bishops' Conference for Evangelization, and I've been with them for the last 3 years. But I don't really see a shift happening. In fact, I think our church is closing in on itself, especially here in our context. So what I think, I mean, this question could be for Lisa or for anybody else. What can we give these young people in terms of hope for a new church, a church that welcomes everybody, and like in terms of equality for women?
I think for me, the biggest hope is in the synod process. Is that familiar to you? Yeah, you did a big synod in Australia. I think the thing is that we have not been given a lot of formation as Catholics in having agency with the decision makers. So synod is only consultative, but before it was like, take it or leave it. You know, your job is to pay, pray, and obey. And I think, like, for me, talking about what happens in the transformation in synod, that and getting people sort of hopeful enough to risk participating, to risk disappointment. So what I tell my children is it's a participatory church, and you know, sort of you kind of, I don't know, on some level we get the church we make, but it's also, we're not the decision makers. So it's like, you can't be, well, I'm not totally foolish, I'm not totally ignorant, but like, I think there's a lot more of us not doing anything because we really can't believe that anything could change. And so some of the best teaching then is about, well, you know, start with Vatican II, baptism, you know, who we are in baptism. The gift of the Holy Spirit is not just for people that are, you know, that are clerics. The Pope Francis, I like to quote him, although never on women, he's not particularly good on women, but like, you know, this is not a prize for the perfect, like the Eucharist is not a prize for the perfect. So there's things that we know experientially in our sacraments that we don't always live up to. And then I turn around and tell people, we're a human institution, and every institution is imperfect. We sin, so we can't expect perfection, you know, and yet, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know. These are the things. I feel like it's the women who have taught me how to sort of get the best things I can out of being Catholic and figure out how to navigate some of the ick. So I feel really happy, weirdly, that I feel really angry that happened, but I feel really happy that you're holding space to talk about that, to unlearn, because that might actually be more formative than never having gone through the bad experience in the first place, if you will. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Act by example. Like, I am working really hard to try to change what I think is not going to work. And there's actually a lot of evidence for hope, because there's been changes that continue to get made. So we keep getting told this story that this thing is always the same thing. It's never going to change. You're an idiot for trying. I mean, they don't say it that way, but that's roughly what it feels like. And yet there's all this evidence to the contrary. So keep following the star, try to get to Jesus. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lisa. I popped the Discerning Deacons website into the chat. I think just Joanne and others, it's a really great resource. I joined a webinar a couple of weeks ago. Was it the 27th of, I don't know, April, or was it April maybe? Oh my gosh. Yeah.
29th. Yeah.
29th. Okay.
I organized that.
Yeah, and that was awesome. Really awesome. it was 2 hours. It was the most inspiring, energizing, hope-filled 2 hours. Great conversations, great panelists, and just to see women so alive in the faith, in the church, and really like being leaders in our church. I was just blown away by it. So I think that it's a great site for resources to engage in the conversation around women's role in the church. It was very disappointing to hear Pope Francis, you know, in the interview with 2020 last weekend, say that there isn't an opportunity for a women's ordained diaconate. But we'll see what happens, I guess, through the synod process. But I think it's just people should keep engaging and be part of the conversation, regardless. Yeah.
The skinny on that is it's not over until it's over. The Pope, that's the routine answer. And that's the routine answer. That's what it is. That's what it is right now. So if he's in an interview, he's going to say what it is right now. Yet he's initiated a whole process towards potential change led by the Holy Spirit. So we don't want to prematurely admit defeat.
Yeah.
So don't prematurely grieve.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. And Janet, we have your question, and I know it's 8:30 now, so maybe Janet, you might be the last question in case anybody has a burning question. Just because I want to respect our time, but over to you, Janet.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone. This is an amazing conversation we're having. A lot of things that I can incorporate in the work that I'm doing. One of the main things that I'd really like to ask in the context of Canada and the others here, whoever would like to answer, not just the panelists, is the issue of the pushback. We are dealing at the UN in the global level in relation to the pushback on whatever have been gained. And this is where I think the Secretary General have made that comment that Mary-Eileen had mentioned in her in the video. And I just want to find out if this is something that's happening in the Canadian or the North American context. We know in some places, of course, in the US, there's a big thing that is in relation to the human rights of women. So women's rights pushback. I'd be interested to hear your experiences. Thank you.
Maybe I'll comment that one of the main trends I see that erodes any kind of social justice or economic equity is just pure capitalism and unbridled profiteering. So there has been quite a push to undo regulation. They call it, red tape and regulation, when we talk about workplaces. So just to even look at Canada, we have, 10 provinces, 3 territories. As there have been elections, we've seen, new benefits, new paid leaves, including like gender violence or family violence leave, and then that's been repealed. Minimum wages are still not a living wage. In even some of the gains during COVID to pay frontline workers have been clawed back. So I'd say there's a lot of economic factors and financial factors and profitability factors pushing against that. In terms of health, I do actually see positive pushes to talk about, like as Karen was saying, like women in research, how healthcare, how we define, how we do drug trials, how we define pain, how we define circumstances, what we fund. I do think there's more visibility and push on that. But again, it depends, like, is it a public policy or is it individual drug companies making decisions? You ask yourself who's making decisions and on what basis. So in terms of other pushback, I'll also just say rhetoric. One thing that I've heard in the public service and other places, it's like, oh, well, if you promote women, then you're taking away jobs from men. It's like, well, or they say you're promoting visible minorities, you're promoting Indigenous. It's like, well, these people have been underrepresented for how many decades? There's been class action lawsuits on this in government about systemic barriers. So, like, how do we help those who need it most? Is kind of how I put the question back. Over.
We have one Catholic high school here in Toronto that is a boys' school that has a woman principal. And at the International Women's Day at the school board this year, there were whole classes of boys from that school at the International Women's Day, which was the first time I'd ever seen that.
I think it's about like retraction. Like sometimes things happen and then it's retraction, and there's push forward and push back at a societal level, not just the individual level. And I really was inspired by what Sarah Tennant said, was about just, you can't stop talking about it once there's it's not like, oh, we already did that, that's over. Like you have to actually, don't let it fade. Like in the justice and racial and economic justice world in the United States, people were like, yeah, we did women's issues in the 70s. Like, why are we talking about that now? It's like, well, because there's still problems, like you actually have to keep talking about it. And I think it's normal for things to kind of, it's not like a straight path progress.
Karen or Sarah, do you want to respond to anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think exactly what Lisa just said, keep talking about it. And we do have to keep talking about the issues over and over and over again until they're resolved. And as Sister Yvonne said, I did read an article though, Sister Yvonne, that said there is a way to do it in our lifetime, and I will send it to you. It was a Forbes article. I don't know if it's true. I didn't actually fully read it, but I'll send it to you just for your information, because it did quote the 300 years, which is very depressing. But there is a way through economics, and it has to be everyone working together, obviously. But I'll see if I can find that article and throw it over to you via email. Thanks. But I really enjoyed listening to all of the speakers. Thank you all.
Could we all get that article? I wanted to know where she got that quote.
Thanks. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
I think that I agree with what everyone has said, and I think I feel a little bit underqualified to speak sometimes. And I think that maybe my version of pushback in my life could be that exactly, that I feel I don't have enough experience, or I don't completely understand, or I'm only 19 and I haven't had the life experience. But then again, I'm 19 and I'm a woman, and I'm experiencing gender inequality just as much as we all are, just at a different stage of my life. And I think that, as Lisa said, and I'm going to say again, it's very important to keep talking about it. And even through the pushback, voices are still heard by those who want to listen. And without keeping on talking about it, there is a very possible potential of letting that pushback win and not advancing. So it's threatening, but there is a lot of hope, I think, is what we could learn from this whole entire webinar, that there is a lot of hope.
Thank you. That is the best note to finish on, hope.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I'm going to pass it just to Mary-Eileen. She's going to do just a little close. And Mary, are you trying to say something, Mary-Eileen? You're muted.
Just very quickly, I think the most important thing for me tonight is to emphasize is that we have to support one another. And in the situations where I was a victim of gender inequality, particularly in the Catholic Church, which happened to me when I worked in parishes, you're working in a man's world, but we need other women to understand and to support us, because in lots of times we get dismissed by people who just are not on the same, they just are not understanding. And for us to support each other, to support other people of our gender is crucial. Crucial. So that's it.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so Mary-Eileen, I'll share my screen for our last slide there.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, we thought it might be appropriate, or you might be interested in seeing the group of us that came from across the world to attend the Commission on the Status of Women to celebrate the 20th anniversary. So there we are. And it is my honor and pleasure to thank the panelists tonight. It was so impressive. Really, I'm at a loss for words. I thought, how do I thank when this presentation has been so phenomenally powerful? I know I speak on behalf of all of us in attendance that we're so grateful for your information, for your passion, for your insights, for your wisdom. Because certainly I know that Evan mentioned it, and it's come up again about the 300 years. And it was certainly a very discouraging statistic when we heard it at our very first presentation at the Commission on the Status of Women. But what we heard was hope. And I think tonight that's what we heard too. You've reminded us of the things we've accomplished. And I think sometimes in a North American, Canadian context, we get kind of comfortable thinking that, oh yeah, we're dealing with this. And as we've said tonight, we need to keep the conversation going because we haven't dealt with it. There's still so many things to accomplish in terms of gender equality. So we thank you tonight for for what you've given us as individuals, as groups, that we can move forward with to advocate for better policies and really in our everyday interaction, our lives. So I would really like to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for giving your time, your expertise, your energy. It has meant so much to all of us on the call. And I'm so delighted that this is being recorded because I know that for a number of our Mary Ward family across the world, this is the middle of the night. So they would not be able to hear this. So I'm so delighted that they will have a chance to listen as well. And of course, I also need to thank the organizing committee, Sarah, Sister Sarah, and Kathy and Eva. Thank you so much. And Sarah, special shout out to you for, organizing this amazing panel of women for us to hear tonight. And to our audience, thank you all for your attention and your participation and your support. And Mary certainly ended us on a great note talking about hope. And I'm underneath the picture, you'll see a quote, a Mary Ward quote that I found over the weekend. And I just thought, isn't that interesting? So would to God that all men understood this verity, that women, if they be perfect, and if they, the men, would not make us believe we can do nothing, but we are women, and that we are but women, we might do great matters. So I think it's so true. Like, here's Mary Ward, 400 years ago, one of the initial advocates for gender equality. And so we continue in her spirit. So thank you all, to all the panelists, to the organizing committee, and to all of you for attending. Have a good evening. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Really lovely to